4. That's the number I want you to have before we even get into the mountains and the vow and the parts of this story that are kind of hard to take. 4 days a year, the young women of Israel used to leave home and walk up into the hills together, and it wasn't for a wedding. It wasn't for a festival. It was for a girl who is never once given a name in this whole chapter. Everything else in this story tends to swallow that little detail up whole. So I wanted you to have it first. Welcome to She's So Scripture, where we take the text seriously, take ourselves a little less seriously, and let Scripture form us instead of just inform us. I'm Diane, and I'm glad you're here, so let's get started. Okay, so we're in Judges 11, Jephthah. And if you know him at all, you probably know the whole underdog part. Kicked out by his own brothers because his mother was, the text just says, a prostitute. Gilead needs a fighter later, and they come crawling back to this guy they threw out. He wins. Mighty warrior. One of the judges God raised up to deliver Israel. We love that story. It's Sunday morning sermon material, right? Right before the win, though, that's the part nobody wants. He makes a vow. And look, I need you to read the actual wording because I've heard this story taught like 100 different ways, and almost nobody stops on the words themselves. Judges 11, verses 30 to 31. Then Jephthah vowed a vow to Adonai and said, "If you will indeed give the children of Ammon into my hand, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return safely from the children of Ammon, it will be Adonai's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. Whatever comes out of the doors of my house." Here's the thing that took me an embarrassingly long time to catch. The Hebrew word there isn't genuinely ambiguous. It can mean whatever or whoever, and the grammar just doesn't decide for you. Some scholars think Jephthah might have been picturing an animal. Houses in that world often kept animals close, sometimes practically in the family's living space, maybe even in the family's living space. So it's entirely possible that the image in his head was a goat, not a daughter, which doesn't let him off the hook, by the way. I used to think it did the first time I read that little footnote. It's actually worse. This isn't a calculated man planning a human sacrifice. It's not. It's a desperate man, so hungry for a guaranteed win that he opens his mouth and makes a promise without once asking himself what might actually walk through that door. And the rabbis noticed. There's a midrash, an interpretation, so to speak, that shows up in a couple of different collections, depending which one you're reading. And in this, God basically corners Jephthah on this. If a dog had walked out first, or a donkey, would you really have put that on the altar? The tradition doesn't go easy on him. Reckless, they call it. A man trying to impress God instead of trusting him. There is a piece of that same tradition that I think is worse than the vow itself, honestly, and it's not really about Jephthah at all. Vows like this could be annulled. A sage had the standing to release someone from a rash promise, and in one version, the daughter herself knows this. She argues Torah. God asks for animals, not people. But the sage who could free her won't go find Jephthah because Jephthah's beneath him now. And Jephthah won't go find the sage because he's the head of Israel, and that's beneath him too. So two men standing on ceremony, and I might argue a lot of pride, and a girl's life in the balance the entire time. So he wins. Verse 32, decisively, God hands him the Ammonites. He has victory. He comes home. Now, verse 34 says, now when Jephthah arrived at his house in Mizpah, behold, his daughter was coming out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. Now she was his only child. Beside her, he had no son or daughter. She's dancing, tambourine in her hand. Her dad won, and she's doing exactly what you'd want your own kid to do, running out the door thrilled for you. She's the one who comes out the door, and he tears his clothes. Alas, my daughter, you made me bow down in grief. You've made me miserable, for I have opened my mouth to Adonai, and I cannot take it back. I read that verse for so many years, and it was only recently, I'd say in the last several, that it actually bothered me. You made me miserable. Her. Sir. She didn't make the vow. She didn't fling that door open scouting for a burnt offering to become. She came out dancing because her father was alive and Israel had won. And somehow the grief in this verse belongs to him. He gets to suffer out loud. She barely gets a reaction of her own. Phyllis Tribble wrote a book called Texts of Terror. And I was doing a Bible study one day with Rav Carl Kimbar. And he had mentioned this book. And so because he had recommended it, I told him, as soon as I get off this call, I'm going to order it. And that's exactly what I did. I got off the Zoom call and I immediately went on Amazon and ordered it. And I think it came the next day. And I sat and started to read it. And I finished the entire book that same day. It was that good. And the next week when I saw Rav Carl Kimbar, I said, that book was fabulous. I told him, I said I ordered it immediately. Actually, I take that back. I think I told him that same day that I ordered it. And he said, oh, you're going to love it. And it came the next day. And then when I saw him the following week, I told him how good it was. So it was an excellent recommendation. And now I recommend it to you. Again, it's called Texts of Terror. I'll actually put a link in the show notes for this. But anyway, she has a chapter that she titled An Inhuman Sacrifice. That's the literal title. And her point isn't to soften the story or explain it away. It's actually the opposite. She wants you to sit in the discomfort of it because no one in the text does the condemning for you. No narrator steps in. God doesn't intervene. It just happens in silence. And Tribble thinks that silence is doing something to the reader, whether we notice it or not. And I think she's right. I don't think we're supposed to get past this quickly. Verse 36, though, this is the one that often kind of gets skimmed over, and it shouldn't be. My father, you have opened your mouth to Adonai, she says to him. Do to me what proceeded from your mouth, since Adonai brought vengeance on your enemies, the children of Ammon. She doesn't run, doesn't argue, at least not that we're shown. She holds her own father to his word, a word that's about to cost her, aside from her life, a husband, children, a name remembered the ordinary way a woman's name got remembered in that world, through her descendants. No legacy. She asked for one thing. Give me 2 months, the mountains, her friends, and time to grieve what she's losing before it's gone. And he gives her that much. And then verse 39, plain, no drama. He did to her according to his vow he had made. Now, I have to be honest because There's genuine disagreement here across a lot of centuries, and I don't want to pretend that this is settled fact. Some readers, going back a long way, argue Jephthah didn't kill her at all, that the word offering here means a lifetime dedicated to celibate service and not death. I get the appeal of reading it this way. It's a much kinder story, but it's not the fringe reading versus the obvious one. Josephus reads it as death. Pseudo-Philo reads it as death. Plenty of church fathers and rabbis across the centuries see it as death. Others don't. I land with the sacrifice reading because mostly burnt offering is pretty specific vocabulary. It's the same word used for actual offerings on the actual altar elsewhere in Torah. And because the whole shape of the ending, the mourning, the annual remembrance reads more like grief for a death than a send-off into service. Which brings us back to 4. The number 4 I gave you in the beginning. Verse 40, that the daughters of Israel would go annually to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in a year. Even the verbs disputed, commemorate, lament, recount, visit, depending on which translation you use, I genuinely can't tell you what those 4 days look like. I wasn't there. Nobody can. But whatever they were, the young women of Israel kept doing them year after year. For a girl who is never given a name in this entire chapter, not once, she's called Jephthah's daughter from her first line to her last, defined completely by whose vow she fulfilled. They remember her anyway. Nobody commanded it, at least not as far as the text tells us. They just went 4 days at a time, long after Jephthah was dead and gone, and nobody was checking to see if they went. They went. And that's the part almost nobody preaches on. Not because it's hidden from us, it's right there in verse 40, but because it refuses to resolve into some neat and tidy lesson about faith or courage. It's messy. It's messier than a lesson. It's just women remembering a woman the men around her didn't think worth naming. And one more thing. This chapter is built to echo Genesis 22. Abraham and Isaac. The literary parallels are tight. Same unusual grammar around the sacrifice itself, an only child, a father, a mountain, a burnt offering hanging over everything. But watch where the two stories split apart. God commands Abraham to that mountain. Nobody commands Jephthah to his. The vow's entirely his own idea, his own mouth, his own doing, his own stupidity. And on Isaac's mountain, there's a ram, a voice, an angel's hand on Abraham's wrist. On Jephthah's mountain, the one his daughter actually climbs to mourn, there's nothing. No ram, no voice, no hand, just silence, and an ending Judges refuses to soften for us. And I think that's on purpose. I think Judges is holding Genesis 22 up like a mirror to show exactly how far things have slid since Abraham. Abraham trusted God enough to obey something he didn't understand, and God provided. Jephthah didn't trust God at all. He tried to buy a victory with a bargain nobody asked him to make, and there was nothing to provide because nobody had asked for an offering to begin with. This isn't Judges handing us a new hero. It's Judges showing us deliverers who are starting to look just like the nations around them instead of standing apart. Hannah does something with the same shape a few books later. Vows her unborn son to God's service. Conditional, like Jephthah's, But hers was never transactional the same way. What she promised was a life spent in service. Jephthah's vow left room for something Torah forbids outright. And I don't think that's an accident. So, where does that leave us? I don't think the story's here to teach you to watch your mouth around God, although fine, it does that too. And the rabbis draw that lesson explicitly. I think it's here so we don't forget her. The text never tells us Jephthah repented, never tells us God rebuked him out loud, never resolves the tension for us at all. It just tells us that some women decided she was worth 4 days a year and let that outlast the man who made the vow. Nobody made them do that. And Torah is clear elsewhere. Leviticus 18:21, Deuteronomy 12:31, that none of this was ever what God wanted. Not from Abraham's mountain and not from a father too proud or too scared or too stupid to break a promise he should have never opened his mouth to make. He acted like God's favor needed to be bought, and she paid for it. Now, I don't have a nice little bow to wrap this up for you in today. It doesn't have a nice, tidy ending. I just have 4 days a year and a story that only survived because some women wouldn't let it go quiet. I want to thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I truly appreciate your support. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platform. This way you'll get updates as new episodes become available. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a review and share the show with someone you know. Your feedback and your recommendations help us grow and reach more people with insights and teachings from a biblical perspective. Stay blessed, friends, and see you next time.